Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC Vegas 120, headlined by Quillan Salkilld and Mateusz Gamrot. We're going to be breaking down 4 plays here on the show today. Now, last weekend, we once again visited a beautiful place, and I like to call it Sweep City. Sweep City is a beautiful place this time of year. We went 5-0 on our client plays, ended up profiting 10 units of profit for clients. Now we are on a 14-1 betting run and have cashed 5 of the last 6 UFC events. We are absolutely on a roll here, feeling great about it, and we absolutely cashed. And one of our big ones last week was on Medic to win inside the first 2 rounds by knockout. And as I said, that first punch could land and end it. It did. Easy peasy. We move on to this week. So if you want to become a client, link in the description. I've got a 5% play locked in, and we'll have more as we get closer to fight night. So with that being said, let's dive into the main event of the evening between Quillan Salkilld and Mateusz Gamrot. Now, you've got Salkilld sitting at -135 in the comeback here. We've got Gamrot at +114. Now, you got Salkilld here, who I think does look the part. This kid he's 12-1, 5-0 in the UFC, and has really went out there and has showed a lot of skill, a lot of power, going out there, knocking guys out left and right. The interesting part about that is he is really primarily a grappler. He's a guy that's going to look to get takedowns, look to get the grappling going, and he has found a lot of success doing that. We're seeing him really kind of elevate his striking overall. While you've got Gamrot here on the other side, who primarily is a wrestler, a heavy pressure wrestler. He's going to stay in your face. He's going to look to rinse and repeat, chain wrestle, latch onto you, be relentless with those takedowns, and really look to get that control, bank rounds in top position, and win by decision. He's kind of a decisionator. He's that guy that, we're not going to see many finishes out of him, even though we got one in his last fight. But pretty much for the most part, he's going to be looking to, get the wrestling going and get that control time. But one of the biggest issues, I think, for Gamrot, and going back and watching tape, is the fact that he doesn't have great top control. That's the thing. His top control is not the greatest. He's a guy that absolutely an elite wrestler, incredible wrestler, quick level changes, good takedowns. He has all of those things. But once he gets the fight to the ground, outside of that first round or 2, he can really start to slow down. He struggles keeping that position. He can struggle against Quillan Salkilld, who I think has very good scrambles, good get-up game. He's a guy that has grappling ability and also does have wrestling in his back pocket. And I think those things are going to counter a lot of the wrestling that Gamrot's going to be pushing here. And also, I think that, Gamrot will struggle with Salkild's physicality. I think he's going to struggle with the size advantage here. I think there's going to be multiple things here that are really going to be very difficult for Gamrot to really kind of overcome. And also, you've got to add in that Salkilld is by far the more dangerous fighter between these two. I think all the finishing equity in this fight really sits with Salkilld here. I think he can get the submission. I think he can find the knockout here. He's the better striker. So if this fight plays out on the feet, he is going to have a lot of advantages, I think, on the feet here for Salkilld. Harder hitter, clearly, I think, between these two guys, 5-inch reach advantage. There's a lot of things there that he can, do if it does play out on the feet. And then that's the problem here, I think, with Gamrot, is the fact that he doesn't have a plan B. If he can't get the fight to the ground, if he can't get that control time, if he can't get the wrestling going, he doesn't really have that plan B where, hey, I'm going to work the striking. I think that's where he can start to wilt. We've seen him in fights also now. He's 35 years old. You got Quillan, 26. He could, Gamrot's cardio has started to tilt down a little bit there, where he can get sloppy. Entries to takedowns start to get sloppy. And that's where someone younger, youth, I think the strength, the size advantage, all those things are going to help Quillan in this spot. And I think he's going to land the damaging, more impactful shots big time here. I do think a finish does materialize here, but you're going to give me Quillan at -135. I think that is a strong price. So give me Quillan Salkilld to get the job done in the main event at -135. And the next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Diego Ferreira. He is -186 in the comeback here. We've got Billy Quarantillo. He is +144. Now, you've got Diego, who is a well-rounded fighter with solid jiu-jitsu. This is a guy that, if you get the fight to the ground, he's going to be very dangerous. He's always going to be opportunistic, looking for those submissions, looking to latch something in, always grabbing on some kind of leg, a neck, any point, because he is that high level with the grappling. Now, he has been able to back up some of his striking, which has been okay, but with a lot of power. He's been able to land, knock out a couple guys and find some success at doing that. While you've got Billy Quarantillo on the other side here, who is moving up to lightweight, for the first time. Now, that's going to be a little bit of an interesting part here where it's a little bit of a variable where you've got a guy who was 1-3, recently got knocked out in his last fight against Cub Swanson, which was back in December of 2024. Then he had a knee injury and then he hasn't fought. So there is definitely some concern when you're talking about those kinds of things. But normally, Billy's a high-paced guy. He's going to come forward. He's going to brawl. He's going to push that volume, push that pace, and be the guy that's really just going to have more output and normally kind of really just overwhelm opponents. Now, Billy moving up in weight, I honestly think is actually a very good thing for him here, where I think at this point in his career, I think he was kind of cramming down to that weight class. I think it's hurt his durability a little bit. I think it's hurt his cardio a little bit. And I think some of those things have ticked down. Not cutting that extra weight, I do think is going to help him here. I think it's going to get him back into kind of a rejuvenated position here. And, again, he's been out. There are question marks here. But if he is somewhat of that same fighter, I think he's going to be far more faster than Diego. And I think the pressure and all of those things are going to weigh heavy on Diego. Diego now 41 years old, Billy 37. So both these guys definitely on the wrong side of 35 years old. But I think Diego is kind of washed at this point here. I don't think he's having his Wheaties anymore, if you know what I'm talking about. I think he looks less in shape at this point. I think his cardio has looked bad. And he's another guy that can wilt under pressure, that if you just pour it on him, he's going to look for that exit. And that is kind of the way that Billy fights here, where he's going to push volume, push the pace, stay in your face, test the cardio of Diego and push that volume out and really stay on him. And that's going to be a big part, I think, of this spot. And I also do think that Billy can get the wrestling going if he needs it. If he wants to get the takedowns, I think they can be there. He's got to obviously watch out for the submission game of Diego. But, it's not that I think Diego is going to find takedowns himself here. Out of the last 7 fights, Diego only has 3 takedowns, and all those takedowns were against Rebecca here. So I think that Diego with his Billy with his pace, pressure, volume, and Diego being 41 years old, you got to give me Billy here at plus money. So give me Billy Q at plus 144 to get the job done. And the next one here at top is going to be Yadier Del Valle. He is minus 720 on the comeback here. We've got Darren Elkins. He is plus 450. Now, you've got Yadier, who kind of was looked at as this rising prospect here. He's 10-1 as a professional, well-rounded skill set. He's got some okay striking, but he's a guy that if this fight gets to the ground, he's got some solid submission game. He likes to get to opponents' backs and look for that submission, lock something in if he can. He wants top control and really just get the fight to the ground, utilize some of his grappling. While you've got Elkins on the other side here who, he's damaged goods. He's just damaged goods at this point in his career. He is on his retirement fight. We talk about retirement fights here where it's normally not a good thing. The guy's on the way out, but he's now 42 years old, and you could just clearly see a down tick in pretty much his entire skill set. And he's a guy that pretty much, used to be very durable. He kind of leaned on that durability, was a guy that, would push forward and get crazy. And now it's slowing down. Now the durability is showing cracks. Now he's looking a little bit more reckless when he's in the pocket. He was always reckless, but he is getting even worse when it comes to that. And we have seen this guy rocked and wobbled, hurt, multiple times, even in wins. This guy is just getting hurt. This guy busts open, and starts bleeding as soon as the announcer finishes announcing his name. I mean, that is just where this guy is. He just consistently takes damage. Now, Elkins is coming off an absolute beating against Julian Erosa, where Erosa landed 54 significant strikes to his 13, and then KO'd Elkins in that fight. So got absolutely ran through, and it's hard to really back Elkins. I get it. This price may be wide here, but the guy's just getting hurt. He can't absorb shots anymore. There's just clearly Yadier is the better striker here, I think, without a doubt. But where I kind of go with this fight, and yes, I just talked about how bad of a chin and how bad, where Elkins is really in his career and his durability. But I do think this kind of plays out more towards the submission side. And why I'm saying this, because Elkins is a guy who we know he's going to do. He's going to come forward, he's going to throw, but he's going to look for takedowns. He's going to mix in the wrestling, whether, whether it's the beginning, the middle, he is going to be shooting takedowns. Now, a lot of times it might be where if he's going to be rocked and hurt, then he's looking for it. But even when he's hurt, he goes on autopilot, looks for takedowns. And that's where I do think that, Elkins' plan here, I would think, is going to be wrestling. Now, we just saw Yadier get, washed on the ground against Jordan Levitt. Levitt got 4 takedowns, 8 minutes of control time. Elkins is a wrestler. I think that is the path here where he doesn't have to take the damage, but he can try to out wrestle Yadier. And that's where I think the submission materializes here, because I do think that, you know, Yadier is a guy that if you give him the opportunity, he's going to jump on submissions. And we've seen him. He's got a nice French choke series. He's got a guillotine. We've seen him even jump guillotine when guys are shooting for takedowns. He will sell out for those submissions here. And I think that that's where, you know, Elkins, 42 years old, you know, retirement fight, end of his career. You know, I think that the entries to these takedowns are going to be very slow. And I think that is really where you're going to see Yadier look to latch something in and look to snatch up that neck. So getting up the minus 720 number, you can get Yadier by submission at plus 270. He's only had one submission in his career, but this one feels like it's lining up very well. So give me Yadier Del Valle by submission at plus 270. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Miles Johns. He is minus 155 in the comeback here. We have Jessie Rosas. He is plus 130. Now, this is a short notice fight for both of these guys. They're both coming in on short notice. Neither was on the card, and they're coming in to fill up this spot. Now, you've got Johns here, who is, you know, a wrestler with a lot of experience. So he's a guy that, you know, has definitely had a little bit of a journeyman career in the UFC, 6-5 in the UFC, and really is just not been consistent, just struggled being a consistent fighter here. He had back-to-back wins and lost 3 straight, but overall, he's a guy that has some strength, has some physicality. He's going to be able to look to get the wrestling going. He can body slam guys down to the mat early, especially. He's going to be very explosive, have that power, have some of those things. He does shoot well-timed takedowns behind combination, so it will be interesting to see kind of how that plays out, because you got Rosas, who, you know, is making his UFC debut, you know, so this is a big spot for him. He is the older brother of Raul Rosas Jr., which is probably why he never went to Dana White's Contender Series, you know, in the first place, and why he is on this card. But he is 8-1, 23 years old, and what I've seen from him, you know, he looks like he's got okay striking. You know, looks like, you know, he's got some jiu-jitsu, and that's kind of where I kind of put him at this point. But this is a large gap in experience level between these two guys, and that's going to be something that I think is huge in this fight here, where you got Rosas, who was pretty much fighting bottom of the barrel guys outside the UFC. Now, I know records don't say, you know, don't give the whole story, but the records of the 4 wins that he has had prior to coming to UFC is 5-6, 9-17, 23-11, and 3-5. So 3 of the last 4 guys he fought have losing records. So he is fighting guys that are just, you know, not caliber of not just UFC level, but probably just MMA as a career level. And you look at really the guys that Johns has lost to. Johns lost to 3 very tough opponents. You know, Daniel Marcos, very tough. Gene Matsumoto, another tough opponent. Felipe Lima, tough. All 3 of those guys would just absolutely rip Rosas apart if they ever fought. So him losing and having some kind of competitiveness, you know, Johns against those guys, I think does say good things here. But the biggest thing here is I don't think that Rosas is going to find takedowns. And that, to me, I think is where this fight is won and lost for him here, where I do think that the better wrestler between these two is going to be Johns. I think that Johns has that physicality, has that strength advantage. I don't really see an opportunity here where Rosas is going to find takedowns here. And I think that also, conversely, Johns is going to be the one that's going to be able to dictate where this fight goes. If he wants takedowns, I think he's going to be able to get them. He's going to be able to get some top time there. I think that if he wants to keep it standing, defend some of those takedowns from Rosas, keep it standing, work his combinations, I think he finds success doing that as well. So I think that this is a big step up in competition here for Rosas, while it's actually a big step down in competition here for Johns here. So give me a guy that's going to get the job done here in Miles Johns, while Rosas, short notice fight, UFC debut, and the toughest opponent he's ever faced. I think that this has got to be a John spot here, a good bounce back spot. So give me Miles Johns minus 155 to get the job done. So there you have it for my plays for UFC Vegas 120. If you want to become a client, link in the description. Again, we are in an absolute run. 14-1 run, cashed 5 of the last 6 events, swept the board last week. So we are just absolutely locked in. And again, take a look down below, 5% play down there. And let's get the job done. See you next week, and let's cash.